Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development Minister Thoko Didiza says she's consulted with all stakeholders in food production. This amid the conflict in Eastern Europe. There are fears the Ukraine-Russia conflict will have a negative impact, specifically on food supply and prices. Let's hear more about that meeting. Minister Thoko Didiza joins me now. Thank you very much, Minister, for your time. We do appreciate it amid your busy schedule. Can you tell us, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the meeting specifically, how South African producers have been affected thus far by the conflict in Ukraine, given that exports are one of our major access to market, especially for fruit producers?
Well, thank you very much, Annie. As you know, that our citrus season is going to be starting in April. Obviously, some of our goods, particularly in citrus, go to that region, Ukraine and Russia. And therefore, we will have to look at other alternative markets given the situation in those two countries.
Now, the meeting that you've had with stakeholders, has that looked specifically at a way forward for citrus producers, and what are they likely to do?
Yes, we have. Firstly, just to indicate that we met with the Fruit SA, which is the deciduous fruit industry, including citrus. We also met the farmers' organization, all of them in the country, Agri SA, AFASA, NAFU, FUSA, and NAFU. We also met Agricultural Business Chamber, ACBIS, as it is known. We also met the Grain South Africa, which is one of the major unions in the grain industry. With respect to the fruit industry, one of the things that we've looked at is how do we expand on the existing markets that we have. For instance, in East Asia and Europe and in the African region, that's where a number of our fruits are going for. So we'd like to see whether we can push volumes in those markets to compensate for the other two countries.
We know that certain fruit export markets have particular standards. China, for instance, requires soft citrus and citrus that has no marks on it whatsoever. A lot of our developing citrus farmers in South Africa will be severely affected because they're not at this stage capacitated to, for instance, export to China. Are you looking at maybe looking at reforms to some of the specific requirements to some of those Asian countries, so that we can, in fact, include all of South African citrus producers in exports as an alternative to Ukraine and Russia while this conflict continues?
Actually, we have. We have reviewed the export requirements, particularly on lemons, with China, which we signed together last year in November, which therefore allows for more of our producers to be able to meet those standards. It's also important to indicate that our smallholder farmers and commercial farmers that export, actually particularly on citrus, they export through Citrus SA. So they do meet the requirements that our various destinations with which we trade actually do require.
It's good to hear. We do import a lot of grains as well. Grains, a lot of that comes from the Ukraine as a major grain producer. How will that affect consumers, and are we expecting a shortage of grain products?
Actually, it's important to disaggregate. With respect to grains, that would include maize, white and yellow. It would include wheat. It would also include rice. Rice, actually, we import it from Pakistan, India, Brazil, and Vietnam. So there won't be any problem in that respect. With white maize, we've got enough, both in terms of what is in the reserves and what our harvest in terms of our crop estimates indicate. So we won't have a problem. And that relates both to South Africa and in the region. With respect to wheat, we do indeed import wheat. But as we stand now, we've already imported about 720,000. We are expecting about 2.2 million from local production of wheat, which therefore puts us in a better position. The other requirements in terms of tonnage that we might require around August will be around 720,000 as well. So we are looking at what are the other alternative markets. But as we stand now, there's actually no crisis.
Let's talk about inputs. Major cost for farmers. Are we expecting shortages of fertilizers, chemicals, pesticides, or any of the other inputs that our farmers are reliant on?
You're correct. We actually import about 10% of our fertilizer from Russia, complementing the other imports we make from other countries. So we are not yet expecting much of the impact in that respect. The stresses that farmers in our engagement yesterday, they are actually concerned about is with respect to energy costs that might be of a challenge in terms of the production season. But we are also working as part of the Interministerial Committee with the Ministry of Energy to look at how we deal with some of those issues that might have impact on our farmers. The other relates to agricultural finance. As you know, that our land bank is still struggling. We are actually looking at better possibilities for agricultural finance for a number of our farmers to be able to go on production.
So food security is the common goal for farmers, for food processors, for agri-businesses, for trading groups, commodity organizations alike. But part of food security is also naturally food affordability. In your engagements, what have you decided or talked about in terms of making sure that while we have enough food, that food is also affordable for most South Africans?
Obviously, one of the issues that we discussed, as I said, the first concern, I must say, for all of us, producers, processors, retailers, and government, we are concerned that we need to make sure that food availability for our citizens is assured. And that's why we are actually engaging with all of these stakeholders as government, but also to assure our citizens so that we avoid panic buying. In the past week, for instance, there were concerns about whether there would be availability or not, and we saw some prices going up, which was really as a result of global shocks, as everybody was concerned about what is going to be the state of play. But those are actually going to come down as different countries, including ourselves, are assessing as to what is available. We also have agreed that we are going to have an 8-week scenario where we are able to assess what is being imported and what is being exported so that we can collectively, with the industry, manage our local situation. As you say, food security is important, but we also want to make sure that farmers are on production. We deal with other challenges, particularly with the locust situation in the Northern Cape that's starting to affect other provinces. And we are also managing the animal health challenges that are there, because managing all of those variables are important to make sure that farmers are able to produce, citizens are able to get food, safe food, but at the same time we're able to get necessary revenues in terms of export, but also a capacity to employ people in the agricultural sector and therefore making a contribution towards job creation.
Well, thank you very much for those insights. That was Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development Minister Thoko Didiza.